is such a fun and fascinating season of Dwell Church. When I've been talking to our church plant coaches, I've been saying it feels like we're moving into year 2, which is exactly what we're doing. So that is right on. Let's at Dwell Church is building a much more participatory model of what church can be. So last January, on January 5th, we had the lunch tables out. We sat in groups, and we did a group project. Each group had to imagine what would they do if they had 4 or 5 consecutive weeks of Dwell Church. And then we stood up and we presented, and they would say, this is what we think is the biggest spiritual issue we face in our world today. And the number one thing that people said, and the number one way they addressed it, is what became the missing piece, where we're talking about building a meaningful and thriving community. That is just part of our faith. The Christian faith is a very social faith. I got 2 stories for you today, but one that really helped shape my imagination for the gift that our faith can be to the world. I told you on several different occasions, actually, the story of the 13 people I once met in a course called Exploring Christianity that I was teaching. They had never been to church before in their lives. It was amazing. It was so much fun. And they said they were drawn to Christianity because it seemed to work for their friends that they knew. That's how they got there. Someone invited them to church whom they trusted and respected, and they showed up because they said, it seemed to work for my friend. I'm willing to try anything. One of them, who eventually became a dear friend, was a Buddhist nun. She had moved from Pennsylvania to Thailand to study Buddhism and had worked at it for decades, and it brought her great comfort. But one day she woke up and said, I am so lonely. Is there a faith that draws me into a relationship with people? So she moved back to the States and eventually came to explore Christianity. And what she said was, this draws people together. That's what has drawn me to it. There is something inherently social about following Jesus. That's what we're going to talk about for the next couple of weeks. Along the way, we'll talk about what people are calling the loneliness pandemic. I will have a few insights into what causes us to feel so lonely in our day and age. And part of what we will do is to embrace together what we are calling a digital fast. Did our slide get in here? I made a cool slide for this. Someday I'll even show it to you. Let's see if we got it here. Yes! Look at that. Lisa made this. I made the next one. Based largely on her work. Full credit for you. Okay. This is the one I made. It's so much worse. It's so much worse. Okay. Here's what we mean by digital fast. Starting tomorrow, I want you to embrace some version of this for yourself. Here are the things I'm going to do. No social media, except like if it's part of your job. Limited sources of news. I've chosen 2, the New York Times and something called The Tangle, which I recommend. It's snippets from like 12 or 13 different newspapers from across the political spectrum on one issue. And their podcast takes like 10 minutes, but you get to hear all these different views. It's fascinating and sometimes real challenging to get through. What I'm calling no phone screen time. If I do need to use a screen, I'm not going to use my phone because there's something inherently built into the phone that's designed to grab your attention. Have you ever thought, I need to check something? Then 20 minutes later, you're checking all kinds of other things. It's designed to do that to you, right? It happens to me all the time. And then finally, fill up your newly found free time with all kinds of goodness. Sometimes between this point in the year and Easter, followers of Jesus will fast something. Lots of different Christian traditions do this. And the way that it helps me to do a fast is sometimes, I'll fast certain kinds of food or alcohol or any other activity, and something within me will say, boy, I really would like that today or tonight or right now. And that is a really helpful cue to say, Jesus, would you make me hungry for you instead? And I think the way that this one works is I'm really fasting something that is not about appetite, but is about attention. So instead, I'll be praying all this time when I instinctually pick up my phone when I'm bored or under stress. Do you do that? The phone has trained you that when something stressful happens, you pull it out. I will say, Jesus, will you help me instead to pay attention to you, to your presence in this moment? And as we'll see, studies show, people run these studies where they say, if you fast your devices for X amount of time, what do you tend to fill it with? One of the instinctual things people fill it with is spending time together. You might live with someone that spends so much time on their devices, you're like, we haven't talked in weeks, but we have spent a lot of time in the same room, right? One of the things that I hope you will fill up your time with in terms of goodness is by reaching out to one another or to loved ones. When you say, I have this temptation to spend some time on one of these devices, what you could do instead is simply to text someone that you love, to call someone that you love. That's what we're going to be working on together. Now, there's some neuroscience here that the phone especially gives you a little hit of dopamine, right? But so does a social interaction. The social interaction gives you a lot more dopamine. But the problem with the phone is it can also give you a lot of cortisol. If you see something stressful on there, your stress levels spike, right? That happens in relationships too. But typically, an interaction with someone that you actually like, if you called an old friend, it wouldn't spike your cortisol levels, but it would give you a huge hit of dopamine. The phone, however, has trained us to accept, to kind of settle for little tiny hits throughout the day. So we think the phone is sort of triggering us to do something relational with a little bit more cost and a lot less payout. So what we're really going to do is try to reappropriate some of that time, attention, both to Jesus and to each other over the next several weeks. That's what we're aiming for in the digital fast. One of the things I want to invite you to think about or to do is to approach this in a way that is life-giving but not rigid. Now, when we were planning this, I told my wife we're going to do a digital fast. She said, what the heck does that mean? So I said, I don't know. People will figure it out. She said, no, give them 4 bullet points so they'll have some clue of what you think they should do. So if you have 4 different bullet points, that would be great. But if you don't know where to start, here is a few ways to start reappropriating your time and attention to things that will really shape you and help you out in life. So we'll put that in an email tomorrow, but we're working on a digital fast. I was practicing this yesterday. It's going to really suck. But over time, I think it is going to be really beautiful for us. So that's going to be fun to do together. One of the people that I talked to as we were shaping this, we're part of these little niche bunches that are emerging into broader, more national networks. One of them is called the Post-Evangelical Collective. Britt Barron is kind of a thought leader in the Post-Evangelical Collective. They are on the board. And I recently listened to them say something that they're doing to embrace their own thriving in 2025 is to change their diet of media. There was a time where we were saying it was a privilege to check out, but now I think we're saying it's good self-care that keeps me in the ring fighting the fight that I want to be fighting by curating my diet a little bit more. So part of the movement that we're following, sort of from the thought leadership at the top, is saying a good idea these days is to curate your media diet a little bit better. So that's where the 2 news sources came from. All right, let's talk about the missing piece. My dream for you, my friends, is that you find yourself in a season of walking closely with Jesus. And I think that almost always means a season of walking closely with each other. Part of what we aim for at Dwell Church is a research-based portrait of human thriving. We'll talk some about what it means to thrive. But I want to start with this story. Someone in our wedding party, I searched all morning today for a picture of my wedding party, and I couldn't find it. But to prove that I got married, here is Katie and I on our wedding day. So you can imagine, some of our friends were with us. They were dressed like that. It was a happy occasion. Those wonderful young people had no idea what they were signing up for. It has been beautiful and difficult and all of it and kids and everything. But part of what we really treasured is inviting our friends to stand on the stage with us as we made a somber and sacred commitment. One of those friends, all of those friends are lifelong people that we're still very much in touch with, most of which we vacation with every other year. One of them, their family was on sort of a longer journey of fertility, and we prayed for them, we walked with them, we cried with them on a number of occasions. Last year, they got pregnant. So exciting, so miraculous, so gospel of new life, all this stuff. So, of course, we had talked that was 15 years ago. Since then, we've been talking about this with them, right? So, of course, we said we would love to throw you a baby shower. And this was Katie's buddy from college. They support Dwell Church. We've been on this really lifelong friendship together, right? So we were so excited to throw them a baby shower. And they said something that I thought was so wise, I will never forget it. They said, we don't want to hurt your feelings, but we're going to ask someone else to throw us a baby shower. We're going to ask our work friends who are our best work friends, because they're part of that middle level. This is what they said to me on the phone. They're part of that middle level of life that makes your daily existence so rich that we can forget about in the really important moments. And I thought, that is a really remarkable and intentional decision. They told me that last year, and ever since, I've been sort of thinking, dreaming, researching, what is the middle level of friendship in my life? Who are those people? And how do I intentionally or not invest in them? Interestingly, a lot of writing has emerged on what it means to be in community, what it means to have a network of relationships, and a lot of writing has come out on that middle level. That is part of what makes human life rich. Most of human life is lived in the middle. I didn't choose you, but you are a part of my life, and I am liking and building a relationship with you level. The people at work, the people in your neighborhood, the people in your class, those are the ones you spend most of your day talking to. But as we will see in a moment, we have de-emphasized those in our digital nomadic lives. We don't do a lot of things with the village any longer. But here is my dream for you, that you start building into, in quite intentional and Jesus-like ways, into all the different levels of relationships that exist around you. Here's why. It matters to God that you thrive. Part of what we have taken to saying recently is that at Dwell Church, you belong because your story matters. We want to build a church where anyone can come here and feel seen and known. And the reason we want people to feel seen and known is that it is part of like feeling alive. It is part of feeling loved, that someone sees you and knows you. And so we're only 1 year old. And we're just entering the season where it would be real appropriate for us to start really seeing and knowing one another. But I hope that you guys start to swap stories in meaningful and transformative ways. And we do that as part of our faith, not just because it feels good, it does feel good, but because it is part of our faith, and it is part of our faith because it matters to God that you thrive. Now, we have to be careful with that word thrive, because we can sort of in an American way think that that means that life is easy, absent of suffering, up and to the right. There was a fascinating dissertation that I read in 2009 written by Dr. Catherine Byron, my wife, where she studied what does it mean to thrive. And what she found is it requires some suffering. You'll never become the best version of yourself without the right amount of suffering. That's why we walked through the 3 different kinds of suffering just last year. Or just last month? When was it? It's all running together right now for me. So you can go back and check that out. What does it mean for us to thrive? Gosh, it means in the gospel sort of word that you have abundant life, that you feel alive, that you feel vibrant, that you feel resilient, that you feel like you get to experience the best version of yourself with some regularity. It matters to God that you experience those things. And it will require, the abundant life that God has for you requires community. This is the way that you were designed. But the world that we have, that we are building together, that we are existing in, that we are tolerating, slowly has undermined the community that we experience, such that, as we've said over and over again, we're experiencing something called a loneliness pandemic. It is one of those things where it's like a low-grade fever that you might not notice unless you sat down and really thought about it, because it is simply the world that we live in. So it requires community to have this abundant life that God has planned for you. What do we mean by community? Here is the research that we're working with. Your life, your community, the people that you exist with and relate to, break down into these 3 circles. You got the center one. I'm calling them your besties. And you could probably quickly identify these people, that you simply love them. They are a core part of your life. If I could have found the picture of my wedding day people, then that you would have gotten to see. Who are my besties? Who do I text constantly all day? That's them. On the outside are affinity groups. These are people that you have nothing in common with, except for, in my particular case, most recently, Dungeons & Dragons, and then before that, surfing. People where I join the Facebook group, I get to know them, I like them, we have exactly one thing in common, and it is affinity groups. Now, part of what has happened in our world is that we have mostly digitized the center group and the affinity group. We no longer mostly live closest to our best friends. We met them in college, and now we text them all the time. Some of us are lucky enough to live near them. The affinity groups in our world, except for when they require physical, like biking groups and that sort of thing, they're also mostly digitized. It's interesting. We'll talk more about how that impacts us. The village, this middle group, researchers are saying this is what has broken down so profoundly in our world. And the most of human life has been lived in that middle circle. So let's talk about some reasons that it has broken down. A guy researching this said, new societal changes are wreaking havoc on the middle ring of familiar but not intimate relationships with the people who live around us, which we call the village. These are your neighbors, people in your town. We used to know them well, and now we don't. But the middle ring is key to social cohesion. Families teach us love, tribes teach us loyalty, and the village teaches us tolerance. The village are people that you didn't choose, but that you built a relationship with anyways, that almost by definition will be very different than you, but you have come to know and love them. And they're fundamental to this tolerance. And so you can already immediately map, like, the divisiveness of our world stems straight from the diversity of the village has broken down. Why might that be? All right, there's three kind of overarching reasons that people point to. One is technology, and not just phone devices, but also that. Part of it was the invention of the automobile and then the designing of the American city around a car. Now you're not like forced to walk to places to meet everyone. In our world, sometimes we walk places. But it began with cars, and then it also had to do with televisions, that before you were out in the world by necessity, and now you had the option at least to stay closer to home. It even changed the way, eventually we'll see in a minute, the architecture of your house. It used to be built around a fireplace. That was the main event. Then for a while it was the dining table. That was the main event. But now every home is built around a TV room. Other technology, you can sort of tell this story, right? Of we were isolated by cars so that we could drive further to our bigger homes. Then we were brought indoors by television, and then the television was in our hand, and then the thing in our hand was designed to keep our attention as long as possible. So we went from outdoors together to indoors and alone. And every person who has shared a bed with someone else has had that 30-minute segment of the day where they're on their device, you're on your device. Is there a physical space more designed for connection than that? And then now in our days, more used for personal isolation. The story of the technology use in our world is one that has drawn us apart and downward. Now, the architecture in our world, part of what a lot of research points to is not just the home designs, but also the community spaces. We build a lot fewer parks, and we build them with a lot less space, and we build them in ways that appeal to a lot fewer people in our day than we once did. It used to be every park or every town was built around a central place where you were expected to pass through in your daily life. We have no shared space that you're guaranteed to share at some point in your day any longer. Finally, there is a philosophy that drives all of this, and it is a philosophy of what a human being is. In our world, we tell ourselves that we are an individual unit that gets to make all its own choices to maximize its own happiness. That's the philosophy in our world that drives all these changes, that you are an individual unit getting to make all their own choices designed to maximize your own experience of happiness. But it's interesting because there are all kinds of studies that break that down. One that I like the most that is called, that I'm calling the commuter train study, but is actually called the myth of the solemn commute. That people on the train often think, I hope no one talks to me. Or on the airplane. You ever been on an airplane and a chatty person sits next to you and you think, why? Why? Not today. I brought a book. So they tried to study this phenomenon where they asked people on the underground in London to have really robust conversations with a random stranger. The longer, the better. And before they filled out, how am I feeling today? Afterwards, they filled out the same, how am I feeling today? And despite the widespread assumption that talking with a stranger is draining and awkward, the result was that they felt amazing afterwards. That you are designed to connect with people. But we have told ourselves a story that I am an individual unit, best left alone to my own choices, so that I can maximize my own happiness. But we see here that that's actually not what you were made for. You were made to make deep connections, even with strangers. On a different study that is really tricky to talk about, they told people, act like an extrovert on the train, and people had to write in, this is what I think an extrovert would do today, and then do that, and then they gave them the same questionnaire of how do you feel today, and they felt amazing. Now, the problem is that sort of valorizes being an extrovert, which was not the case. You're supposed to act like what you think an extrovert would do, which is to talk to the person next to you, right? So you are made for a certain amount of social interaction with the people in your village, and we have really opted out of that part of life. So part of what we're going to do in this series is think about rebuilding our village, but I'm also going to commission you to be a blessing to every circle that you exist in. So let's talk a little bit more about this. What does it cost us to eliminate the village and live in this isolated, like this chosen solitude? Studies tell us, lots and lots of studies, for females, this tends to be depression, and for males, this tends to be antisocial behavior. And this is really fascinating, especially for adolescents, but you can sort of see technology use driving all kinds of mental health issues. But even for like mature family-leading adult males, the antisocial behavior goes up with more technology use. In surveys of time use studies, they've noticed two things. As dinner table time has gone down, it has gone down 40% in the last 30 years. And what they measure there is how many times did you have someone from outside share a meal at your table? It's gone down by 40%. That used to be a main event in everyone's life. And now people sort of avoid it, right? That's one of those things where if you have plans with someone to come over for dinner and they cancel it, you're like, whew, close one, right? The other thing that they find is with increasing technology use, you have antisocial behavior where you think worse of other people, especially for males. Now, for females in these studies, you tend to think worse of yourself with the increase of use in technology. And what it is you have less positive social interactions. You are isolated in all the ways that we have described. It cost us a great deal to live in this isolated way. In fact, my favorite guy, Ezra Klein, is fond of saying, we are living in a way that humans have never lived before. This is a wild experiment to see what happens when you structuralize relational isolation. What happens is we don't notice, but we don't like it. So what are we going to do? Here is what I think we're going to do our very best at. We're going to attempt to follow Jesus. One of the things that Jesus does throughout the gospel is that he gathers. One of the things the enemies in the story do is that they scatter. And so there is something real sacred and holy about simply gathering people. And here's what's amazing, I think, about these studies. We have to become more gatherable. We have to become people who are able to share our vulnerability and our need. One of the things that they identify here that is good about the village is that you experience a bit of neededness. That's the term that they use. When you show up for a village activity, you feel like, oh, I contributed to something important in our world. One example, last week I was on outdoor education with Margot. So fun, 4th and 5th graders up in Sonora. I was excited. I know all the 4th grade boys in Margot's class. They're awesome. Looking forward to spending time with them. Last minute, I got put into the 5th grade cabin. They're a rowdy bunch. And I watched my other cabin leader, who I happen to know is a follower of Jesus, know them, love them, yell at them at the right times, know all of their stories. And he had them asleep by 9:30 every night. The teachers literally were like, please tell us, how did you do that? And I didn't know the right way to say, I think he just loved them, like because of Jesus. But it worked. I played soccer with them in the dormitory amongst the bunk beds. It was so violent, big piles of these 5th grade boys. And I felt what they described as neededness, that there was something about being there that made me feel like they needed me. They needed someone to show up. Some of those guys didn't have dads. Some of those guys needed an adult male to tell them, this is how you behave. Some of them needed to say, I see you and I love you and I'm glad that I know you now. And it could have been anyone else. It didn't have to be me, but it was. And for a huge network of people, it doesn't have to be you, but it is. You are needed. And so for all these things that are such a drag sometimes to show up to, the PTAs and the outdoor education and the baseball practices and any volunteer opportunity and things like church, sometimes you're like, part of me doesn't want to do this. But when you show up, something incredible happens for you. And the case I'm going to be making to you is if Jesus' Spirit is living within you, you have a superpower to make those moments when you show up even more transformative and magical. You have a mission living within you, and you have the power to do it, to see people and to love them in ways that they will never, ever forget. We will build these circles together. Jesus gathers. But he doesn't just gather people like into a crowd. He's gathering them into something specific, sort of detailed here in Ephesians chapter 2. Consequently, you are no longer foreigners and strangers. You're no longer individual autonomous units making decisions for yourselves to maximize your singular happiness. You are instead fellow citizens with God's people and also members of his house, built on the foundation of the apostles and the prophets, with Christ Jesus himself as the chief cornerstone. And in him the whole building is joined together and rises to become a holy temple in the Lord. And in him you two are being built together to become a dwelling place in which God lives when you show up in Jesus' name. The very presence of God shows up too. Jesus doesn't just gather us into a crowd, he gathers us into a place where God arrives. And so here's what we're going to walk through over the next couple of weeks together. Today we're talking about the problem, these three arenas of life, especially that middle sphere, broken down, these broken circles. Next week we're going to talk about the friend-making God. It's easy to talk about God as all-powerful, omnipotent, dominating, powerful force in the pillar of smoke and fire, but it is scandalous to talk about the God who genuinely wants to be friends with every human being. And in week 3 we're going to talk about the character formation, what you have to have within your heart to become someone who can build or heal these circles. I'm going to commission you all to be people who show up and who build these relationships. That's what we're going to do together. The other thing we're going to do together is we're building all kinds of opportunities to connect into the next 6 or 7 weeks. Between now and Easter, we're going to have all kinds of moments. I just real humbly want to invite you, take the opportunity to connect with the amazing people at Dwell. I get to be somebody who knows mostly everyone, knows most of their stories, and I have a deep conviction amazing people come to Dwell Church. I just want you to know each other. So we'll send out a couple things that we're asking real specifically to do over the next couple of weeks. One is find your own version of the digital fast. When you're like, oh, I want to use these devices in whatever way you like to use them, instead say, Jesus, will you help me to pay attention to you? And then text somebody that you know and love or call them. The other thing I want to invite you to do is at least one time show up to one of these opportunities to connect, because amazing people go to Dwell Church. God is gathering us so that his Spirit can dwell here. Let me pray for you all. Dear Jesus, thank you for all the people, small and tall, who come to Dwell Church. Will you craft us, Lord, into a community where your Spirit can dwell? God, there's something real concrete about just showing up and chatting. And then there's something real subjective about seeing each other. Lord, so by the power of your Spirit, will you empower us, A, to even show up, but B, to really love each other in ways that allow us to feel seen and known. God, would you help us to be people that carry the conviction in our heart that another person's story matters to me because it matters to you, God. We lift our lives up to you, Lord. Would you build your community here? Amen.